Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm going to talk to you about two features of large-scale social phenomena, very important ones. So superstardom and superspreading. And I'll give you the secret for how you can achieve these things yourself at the end. So all for free. Yeah, that's what we do. So the Mona Lisa, the most famous painting in the world by far. I mean, if you ask people what are the top 3 paintings in the world, they probably wouldn't get past this one. It was painted, you know, Leonardo knocked this out in the early 1500s and wasn't apparently particularly happy with it, but it really, not languished, but it sat around for about 400 years before people started to say, well, this is a really good painting. They were looking at, you know, Michelangelo and Raphael, these other guys who were pretty good with paintbrushes. So there were more focus on these. If you went to the Louvre, that they were the paintings people were copying. And then, so it takes up. And so I want to come back to this and try to understand why it took 400 years for us collectively to sort out that this is the greatest painting in the world. That's pretty bad. So this has been in a remarkably successful series of books, and I've read all 7 of them to a couple of small children at home. But 12 editors said, this is not good. I'm not going to publish this. The 13th only did apparently because his granddaughter said, I really like this book, Granddad. So, but amazing, you know, this has been unbelievable. So something that sells, it's 10 times better than the next thing in terms of sales. How could we not know beforehand? How could we be just so horribly wrong about success and fame? So it's not just about culture and so on. It's very serious things, of course, happen rather abruptly. And the fall of Eastern Europe turns out to have been one of these tremendous shifts that was just simply not predicted. And you can go and look into the work that's been done on that. Really just not foreseen. Even the most optimistic people didn't see that this was going to happen as quickly as it did, or even that it would have ever happened. So let's talk about something that we understand quite well. It's a tragic kind of spreading. It's a terrible thing. This is from Victoria in Australia. So Australia is often on fire to a large extent, or underwater, sometimes at the same time. It's an interesting continent. So we know sparks start fires. It's very clear to us. We know it spreads. We know that it was dry. We know the trees are connected. And we can say to ourselves, you know, dangerous times. Do not go out and light things. So we know it's a system story, right? We know in this case, obviously it's a system story, and we would never go back and find the match that started the fire and say, this is the key to this fire. I will now copy this match and I will go and start many more fires, which would be very hard today in Vermont because it's pouring with rain. If you could go out to as many forests as you want, you won't start a fire because that's a system story that's all wet. So the system is not ready for spreading. So we make 2 quite serious mistakes about, I'm going to say this, about social fires, if you like. And there's a very famous work that's been mentioned already today, so Malcolm Gladwell's tipping point. So you see right in the middle there's a match, right? And he's talking about social phenomena, there's a match. So this immediately frames the story that it's the person who starts things off that's the key, that's the important thing, right? It's moving us away from the frame of the system. And I'm going to tell you that's a big mistake. So there are 3 reasons why we make a couple of mistakes that I'll show you. There are 2 different levels of mistakes. So if you can read this, so we have a random sequence of events. We're fantastic at laying a story on top of it and explaining exactly why that happened. Journalists do it all the time. Financial people do it all the time. The market was up, the market was down. Here are the reasons. Oh, sorry, the chart was upside down. In fact, here are the reasons. Sports commentary is great. You know, this is why they won because it was this and that. You know, it's ridiculous, but it's fun. We love it. We're all individuals. This is Life of Brian, one of the more important treatises on religion, and that we've managed to produce. So we're all individuals. And what I'm trying to say here is that we don't understand groups very well. It's very hard to put your mind in the mindset of 300 million people talking together, right? That is a very hard thing to grasp. So we tend to reduce things to individuals. We tend to see groups of people and want to identify a leader and say, this is why it happened. We talk about the president, for example, as making all of these decisions, and apparently no one else thought of anything. And it's just an easier frame for us to it's a natural frame, it's a frame we always go for. So you can hear this guy, it's a little Australian heavy. Sorry, so that's a car alarm. So this is the lyrebird. That's unfortunately the sound of forest being cut down in Australia. So they're fantastic mimics. They're fantastic mimics. And the superb lyrebird. Yeah, that was bad. So they'll mimic other animals, which is their main thing, but then they'll just copy all sorts of mechanical noises as well. So remarkable, the lyre is for their tail, but they're liars in a way as well. So we think octopuses are amazing, change shape and color and texture and all sorts of things. Parrots, we get very excited about parrots, telling us what our great-grandfather said in very rude words. We think that's amazing, but we are the fantastic mimics. We're the great imitators, so much so that we hardly know, right? Our accents are all built on copying, our language, we get all sorts of things from each other, and we're really, really good at impersonation. So we do it very naturally. It's a very big part of human behavior. All right, so mistake number one. So the first part is about superstardom and then super spreading. This is a very easy thing to say. Something took off, it succeeded, it became great because of its intrinsic qualities. So you'll see this all the time. So the Mona Lisa smile, the way the eyes follow you around the room, there's all these sort of arguments which, when you think about it, they're intrinsic. David Sassoon has a wonderful book, if you're interested in reading this some more, about the trajectory of the Mona Lisa. 400 years before it takes off, and then 100 years of increasing fame. So lots of things started to happen. People started to think Leonardo was pretty clever after a while. It was stolen at some point. There was vandalism. It got itself into the papers, so there was this little bit of leveraging up and up and up, and it becomes incredibly famous. Then you get parodies, and you get parody of parodies, so that happens all the time. If you've actually been there, when we talk about intrinsic qualities, if you've walked in the Louvre, as you know, I managed to do several years ago, it's disappointingly small. It's only about this big, and this is not a very good art critic comment, but by this point, you've inflated this thing. It must be the size of, oh my God, I'm going to go see this magnificent thing that took, yeah, it's really small. So it doesn't feel like it should be the most famous painting in the world. So how could something be so successful and not be predictable? So here's a little experiment we did a few years ago where we set up a music download site, and people knew it was an experiment. They came along and they started to download songs and listen to them. And we had a couple of versions where one was a random layout of songs, and these are songs, you don't know what these songs are. They're from indie or bands that are just building them in their garage and so on. There was a random set out of songs, so that was kind of a weak social signal. You could see what other people had downloaded. And then there was a top 48, 48 songs, so top 48, if you like. So you could see what people had done in the past. So there's two setups. The other thing that people didn't know, though, was that there were 8 parallel worlds and then 1 independent world. So in all of these 8 parallel worlds, you'd see what people had done before you, right? So you could start to, if you wanted to, you could copy and take information from other people. And in the individual worlds, we use that as a way of getting, not intrinsic value, but a way of getting a measure of the value or the worth of these songs to people within this test population. So a couple of things stood out. So along the bottom here, we have the rank of the songs in the independent world. So this is, if you like, this measure of their value. So it's 1 down to 48. And then vertically, we have, for each point, we have 8 values, 8 ranks in all of these 8 socially dependent worlds. And so you see this massive scatter. It would be a straight line, a nice straight line, if watching other people didn't affect you, right? That you still made the same evaluations. But just as it turned out, the very best songs tended to do pretty well. The very worst songs, which were absolutely terrible, turned out to, that's my judgment, turned out to be fairly bad across. But you see this massive scatter. There was one song that came first in one world and 40th in another, which is really crazy. But what you see from this is that as we turned up this social signal, as it became more clear what other people were doing, you see stronger inequality. There's more of a rich gets richer. So there's more following leads to more of a rich gets richer, more of a spread, more of a skew. But at the same time, there's less predictability because the initial conditions matter, who turned up and started listening to the song. So you get a world that looks like this thing that's winning by so much, your natural tendency to say, well, it just must be so much better than everything else. But it actually could be just a much more random, unpredictable world where, because of following, you're getting that runaway success. We did one very naughty thing at the end, which was to turn the list upside down in one of these experiments. So you get your 48 songs spreading out in one world, and then you just turn the list upside down. So the worst song is at the top, and the best song is at the bottom. And then you let this run. You create a few more experiments and let this run. So what you see now is this song that was terrible, and no one was downloading it, now starts to do okay. It starts to take off, right? It's like, okay, it's number 1, so I'm going to copy that a little bit. And so it starts taking off. It doesn't do as well as the original number 1 song did. And so deceptive advertising, payola, these things can, if you somehow front your object in front of other people, it can take off. But collectively, it's a big fail. That's a disaster. The system doesn't perform as well. Of course, people might not know, as in the case of payola. But that's a good example of badness. All right, so mistake number 2. So all right, so we know it's not intrinsic qualities completely. Obviously, some content matters. And there is this famous way of saying this, content is king. So we know it's something to do with social. All right, so then we decide, fair enough, let's get into those social links. And we'll put our advertising dollars into that. And so I'm going to say that that is a very bad thing to do because you're messing with trust. So if we go back in time, this is the 30s and 40s, thinking about, so media is really taking off. We've got radio and then television. So suddenly people are being, and this was the model, this injected with media. So it's a hypodermic syringe model. People are just sitting at home on the couch and they're hearing these things and absorbing them. So that was a very straightforward model to start with. It became a little more sophisticated, and this is Katz and Lazarsfeld in 1955. They called this model the two-step model of influence. So again, there's media. There are these superstar type characters, these people who are influentials, who listen to the media, and they're the ones that impart things to their friends who are watching these characters around them. Now, if you look at what they wrote about at the time, they said, this is just a simple model. It's not a bad way to think about it. It's more complicated than what we had before, but it's much more of a network story. Nevertheless, people for a long time have been going out trying to find the influentials, the opinion leaders, the people who will change everything, the matches, right? They're trying to find those matches. And someone who started something over here, then you want them to start your thing over here, and so on. Again, not looking at the system story. So it's much more like this. Kind of a network, everyone's being influenced in all sorts of different ways, and of course media has evolved crazily, so there's so much more spreading. And so here's the nutshell of how quality super spreading works. It's that not these big supposed influential characters, not the matches, but it's very much like the forest fire story. So you have average individual people out in the social wild, connected to each other, who are absorbing these messages. They enjoy absorbing, there's some benefit to getting the message, and they'll pass it on. There's something about the content that makes them want to pass it on. So that's their complication for content is king. So what spreads very quickly, and sort of unfortunately for humanity, is pictures of cats on the internet. Rubik's Cube is a big deal, but when I was a kid, tattoos have spread, all sorts of things, but much deeper things, religion, beliefs, and all sorts of things. But what spreads very quickly now, and so you see this little categorization. This is Jonah Peretti, who started up BuzzFeed. Very smart guy who's figured about these things out. So there's WTFs and fails and trashy and LOLs. People like, these are jokes, if you like, right? So you think about jokes. That's a good thing to spread. You laugh because it's funny, and then you want to share that with people. So they're a good kind of extreme example of what spreads fast. So the other thing is news, and BuzzFeed itself has taken on a lot of reporting as well, because that's the other thing that people will spread very naturally, very quickly. So I was talking about average people spreading things, and it's not the influentials, and how we make this second mistake of trying to then influence the social links. So this is an article that just appeared in the Atlantic. It's Alexis Madrigal, very very nice piece, and it's this observation that a lot of what's being the traffic that's moving around on the web. So someone goes to a page, and you can tell if they've been at Facebook or Twitter. Lots of sneaky things that people are doing. Over half of it is unaccounted for. Someone just types in a web address, they get it from their email, because email, thankfully, is still hidden to some extent. They get it from instant messages. So that's, and he has the same idea here, that you can't mess with social trust. You need to let these things spread out in the wild. And I'm going to say it's much more than that, right? This is a completely made up pie chart, but it's the idea that, of course, we're off the web, we're talking about things. Chris, my colleague over here, wears Solomon's at the moment because I mentioned they were good shoes, right? So this is, these are sorts of things that happen naturally, very organically, and it's trust, and you don't want to mess with people's trust. So I have just this little summary here, and this is how to spread. So here's your great success. So this thing. So we're going to spread squares, and I'm going to call it share-worthy content. And so this is really what you want for things to spread. You want to have the people of these little dots here, you want them to be thinking about your square and telling your friends. That's ideally what you get. But this is away from you. This is out in the social wild. This is a way where you don't control this, and you shouldn't think you do. You want to advertise? Fine. That's great. You should advertise. But you should not get into people's social links. That degrades trust. It's not good. It's unhealthy. If your friend is shilling for some company, you'll be very upset. Now, And what do? You keep trying. I'm not saying this is easy, but you keep trying, so these people aren't enjoying your square, so you edit it and you turn it into a rectangle, and then that takes off. So that is really ultimately the secret to absolutely quality success. Not saying it's easy, but this is the stuff that really spreads well. It's stuff that spreads far away from you, and you somehow need to be able to track that. So I think we're good.